Hello, I'm Robin and welcome to Bookspin. Today I'd like to talk about Jumpnauts. That's this book by Jingfang. This is a recent release, it just came out in March 2024. So many thanks to the publisher, Head of Zeus, for sending me this copy. This is a Chinese science fiction novel. It's translated by Ken Liu, who previously did her previous novel, Vagabonds. This particular book was quite a spur of the moment reading choice for me. It's been a few years since I've read anything by this author, and I wanted to see what else she's come up with. So I saw this book advertised with this lovely cover art here, and I heard it's a philosophical first contact story, and I was instantly intrigued, so I dived right in with no real preconceptions about what to expect. And it turned out to be quite an intriguing and unpredictable story with some pretty outlandish concepts and some rather larger-than-life characters. But at the same time, it's also very philosophical in tone. There are a lot of references to Chinese history and Chinese mythology and classical Chinese philosophy. And somehow the author manages to link all of these things together into a first contact event in which visitors from an alien civilization enter our solar system. And we follow a small team of protagonists who go out into space to seek out these visitors, find their spaceship, and meet them. So that's the basic premise. I'll talk a little bit more about what happens, because I think it's worth discussing. So the backdrop to this story is there's this new future society. It's the late 21st century. The world has entered a new Cold War era. There are two major powers that have emerged, the Atlantic Alliance and the Pacific League. And the relationship between these two is not going very well. It's deteriorating. And in fact, there's a very real possibility that things are going to escalate into a full-blown war at some point. And then an alien signal is picked up on Earth. And this is first detected by a Chinese citizen of the Pacific League, whose name is Yunfan. And she is a young archaeologist who has exclusive access to some mysterious ancient artifacts deep within the mausoleum where she works. And this is the burial place of the ancient emperor Qin Shi Huang, who was the creator of the first unified Chinese empire. So he's a very important historical figure. She believes that these artifacts are actually extraterrestrial in origin. And this is a theory that was originally proposed by her father, who was something of a disgraced academic. His reputation was destroyed because of his crackpot views. No one believed him. But basically, his belief was that there's a technologically advanced alien civilization that has been periodically making visits to Earth throughout our history. So once every few hundred years, these aliens come to make contact with us. And every time this happens, we receive a major advancement in our technology. And human civilization gets upgraded, in a sense. So these aliens are actually benefactors to humanity. Her father has since died, but she has continued in his footsteps and dedicated her work and her research to vindicating his beliefs and proving he was right. So when she picks up the alien radio signal. She sees this as her cue to make contact with these aliens. And it's very important that she does so quickly because she doesn't trust anyone else to react responsibly. In particular, the two superpowers will most likely see these aliens as a threat. Or at the very least, they will wish to use them to their advantage against the other side. So whatever they do is not going to be in humanity's wider interests, and certainly not in the interest of the aliens. So what Jingfang does is she sets out on a covert mission to find the alien vessel out in space, which has now entered our solar system. So she wants to get there first before anyone else does. Now, at this time in our future, we do have more advanced spacefaring abilities. They've moved on a bit. But she's just an individual, so she still needs extra resources to go on this venture. So she enlists help from this man called Jiang, who is the flamboyant son of a rich aristocratic family. And he's a bit of a maverick. He's very full of himself, but he's also an astronomer who is sympathetic to her cause. And he has access to a private spaceship from his family. So he's got the means to go on this journey. But it's not just the two of them, because the Pacific League quickly gets wind that something strange is going on. And so they send along a third person to investigate, whose name is Jingfang, and he works for a top secret Chinese military research institute. And he's also Yunfan's ex. So there's a bit of a personal relationship going on. So you've got Jingfang, and you've got these two men. And at first, the relationship between these two men is quite tense and antagonistic. It's almost like a love triangle, but not quite. But ultimately, they realize that they want the same thing, more or less. And so they decide to work together with Jingfang and embark on a journey into space with her to meet the alien spaceship. And that's basically what happens in the first act. But it's in the second part of the story when they actually make contact, and that's when things start to get really interesting. It's pretty wild, it's unpredictable, totally not what I was expecting, and it does get pretty mind-boggling in parts. So I won't spoil any of the details here, but I'll just say it's a very fresh and entertaining spin on the first contact trope. It soon becomes clear that the results of this encounter could have profound implications for humanity, the next step in human civilization, whether that'll be a good thing or a bad thing. And depending on how the powers back on Earth respond, this could be great, or it could be the recipe for a catastrophe. So overall, I did enjoy reading this. I think the story flows quite smoothly. The concepts are engaging and original. And it's an entertaining read. It's not perfect, though. I think the dialogue feels a bit stilted at times. And this may be partly a translation issue, but I think it's probably more a stylistic choice. There's philosophical dialogues. They feature quite often throughout conversations, and you get frequent references to Chinese philosophy, including quotes from Confucian and Taoist philosophers. So these come up quite often in the dialogue, and although it's quite interesting, it doesn't really feel very like a very naturalistic way of talking. And this even happens during action scenes and fight sequences. You've got this going on, so it doesn't feel very natural, I guess is my point. And there are quite a lot of cultural references, historical and linguistic references, that probably a lot of Westerners won't be familiar with. Ken Liu does occasionally provide footnotes, but not always. So you may have to do a bit of Googling to understand everything. So things like philosophical concepts or the names of mythological creatures are referred to by their Chinese names rather than an English translation. So, for example, a Chinese dragon is not called a dragon, it's called a long. Or you get a term like Yuanfen appearing in a dialogue without any direct translation. I mean, it kind of gets explained a bit through context, but there's no footnote or direct translation. So, Yuanfen, for example, that is a Chinese concept, which is somewhat analogous to destiny or fate, but it's more complex than that. So I guess there's no quick translation which would do justice to the term. But it's not really explained explicitly. Now, I don't think that's an issue for me, because I'm someone who is quite invested in Chinese culture, and I enjoy reading up on these kind of things. I think these things are interesting, and it does make for a more authentic translation. But this may not apply to everyone, and it does take you out of the story somewhat if you need to keep on looking things up. But another thing I'd like to say is I did have some trouble getting on with the characters in this story. I think the characters felt a little bit thin, at least to start with. The two male characters which I've talked about, Jiang Liu and Qi Fei, in particular, they kind of felt a bit like cartoon stereotypes. But I will say it does get better over time as you progress through the novel, especially once you get into the second act. Once they go into space, and especially once they enter the spaceship, each individual has to undergo some level of introspection and soul searching. And it actually turns out into a bit of a character study. So their characters do develop and become more interesting, more three-dimensional over time, even if they're not totally believable. So I would say it's not perfect, but I think these are all quite minor issues for me. Overall, it's still a great read. It's very imaginative. It's very entertaining. It's good fun to read, and sometimes thought-provoking. So I'm going to say 3.5 stars. I think it's definitely worth checking out if you like first contact stories, and especially if you're interested in exploring science fiction from another culture. So that's all for today. I am currently reading Inverted World by Christopher Priest. So that will be the next book I talk about. I'm actually reading this with Bart from Bart's Bookspace. Really enjoying this so far. So I can't wait to start talking about this one. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I'll see you again soon.